Patrick, was this an effective cross-examination by the state's attorney, Mr. Waters?
I don't think so.
Why not?
I think that it oftentimes felt that he was frustrated and he was interjecting statements and commentary after the witness gave his answers. He was asking compound questions where you're asking multiple facts in a row where the question no longer is a question. It's confusing what you're asking. It's just you making a statement. He did that over and over and over again. And most importantly, he would ask questions in very open-ended ways. And probably 70% of his questions started with, would you agree with me on this fact? And he would then state the fact. Instead of saying on June 7th, you went down to the kennels at this time, is that correct? Or just a straightforward question with very little for you to be able to interject why you did it. Very narrow question where he controls the questions and he basically controls the answers. He did none of that this entire time. And he looked very flustered during the entire cross. He would run around the courtroom, and there's moments where he's even on his knees, questioning him on his knees and like pointing at a TV screen and like he just looked frustrated. And Alex Murdaugh sat up there and he looked like the reasonable person in the room. And Alex Murdaugh is the one that spent over a decade stealing millions of dollars from people that trusted him. It was amazing.
Exactly. I think the defense went away from that this weekend thinking for the first time that they're probably going to win this case because we've seen everything the state has. They don't really have any evidence against Alex Murdaugh. They were not able to paint him as a really bad person. I think that they'd been able to paint him as an awful person because they got all this evidence in. But I think after the 2 days of Alex taking the stand, he was able to give context to a lot of things he otherwise wouldn't have been able to do and able to paint himself in a better light. I mean, this is a guy, you talk about painting yourself in a better light when you're admitting stealing millions of dollars from your clients and your law partners.
Yeah.
You still saw him more as a human being than you did prior to the days he took the stand. And your overall perception of the state is that they were grasping for straws everywhere they looked because they just don't have any evidence in this case. They have a bunch of circumstantial evidence that doesn't really add up to much. And then they have one or two inconsistent statements that Alex is having to admit he was at the kennels when earlier he said he wasn't. But then he was able to explain all of that to them. And then at some points even give explanations of what else could have happened. He was like, the witness was able to say, you're asking me if it happened like that. Let me tell you how I think it happened. I think somebody was after Paul because of this Mallory Beach case. And he went on and on and on and on and on about it as if he was controlling the questions. And frankly, a lot of that is Creighton Waters asked really open-ended questions and gave him the opportunity to explain himself over and over and over again because he wasn't asking closed questions.
Yeah, so let's see. We're going to look at a couple of good examples of this.
We're hearing that now, correct? Now about the time in May that
convinced Maggie that I got those pills in anticipation of the eye surgery, but that I never took them so that she would not worry that I was, once again.
Now you're claiming that about the time in May, that Paul talked to Maggie and convinced her of that? Or are you talking about a different time?
I'm not claiming that, Mr. Waters. That's a fact. This is what happened.
All right. We're hearing that now, correct?
Hearing what now?
What you just said.
Well, you just asked me this. Mr. Waters, you keep making an issue about the first time you hearing these things. When I got arrested and I went to jail, we began reaching out to you to talk to you about all of these things, to try to tell you everything that I'd done, to give you all these details, to help y'all go through these financial things. And up until the time that y'all charged me with murdering my wife and child, you would never give Jim Griffin a response to our invitations to sit down and meet with you.
So you're telling me I never responded to Jim Griffin? Is that what you're saying here today?
I'm telling you.
Are you saying that you ever before yesterday reached out to anyone through yourself or through your attorneys and reached out to anyone in law enforcement or the prosecution and told them the story about?
I'm telling you.
Answer my question first, please, sir. Answer my question first. Did you ever?
I think this is important, and I think this exposes something about the state's case. Do you recognize what Creighton Waters just did there? Alex Murdoch just said that his team, when he was charged with the financial crimes, reached out to the prosecution to meet with them about these things, these financial crimes. Alex Murdaugh just said these financial crimes. and to deal with those and to put all that on the table and to explain what he did wrong and that he never heard anything back. And Creighton Waters' response is, you're telling me that you never reached out, or that you reached out to talk about that you were at the dog kennels? Creighton Waters has exposed how much he really enjoys arguing with Alex Murdoch. He argues with him over everything. He wouldn't have diverted it over to the dog kennels because that's not what Alex Murdoch was talking about. That's an example of how weak their case is.
Who's questioning who in this exchange? Who looks like they're on trial here? He's totally flipped it on them because he's asking such poor questions and he's getting so flustered and he's not controlling his witness by asking short, concise yes or no questions that he's allowed this to become a back and forth in front of the jury where it just looks like an argument, and one party in this argument is running around the courtroom looking flustered and asking questions that last for 20 seconds. Whereas Alex Murdoch is just answering things and giving his side of everything that's happened and explaining himself.
But for the next few minutes, Creighton Waters runs around and says, did you talk to Mark Ball about not being at the dog kennels? Did you talk to your brother Randy about not being at the dog kennels? Did you talk about all these other things, about this lie, about not being at the dog kennels? And that whole conversation had nothing to do with the dog kennels. It had to do with the fact that he was offering himself up on the financial crimes and discussed that before he was charged with the murders of Maggie and Paul, because he did qualify it. He said, until you charged me. But the problem also, I think, with Creighton Waters, Alex Murdoch's listening to everything that Creighton Waters is asking him, and Creighton Waters isn't paying any attention at all to Alex Murdoch's response. He's not listening. He's like prepared for his next question, and it feels like he's just on a roll going nowhere.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's beating around the bush, beating a dead horse, and not controlling your witness. And I mean, just that is a perfect example of what it looks like when you're not controlling your witness, when you're cross-examining them. Just let's explain to people a little bit about how this is taught and how you're supposed to put this into practice. When you're in cross-examination, there's two types of questions. There's open-ended questions, and then there's closed questions. An open-ended question is a question that I throw out there to really allow you to extrapolate. I say, Patrick, what did you do yesterday after you woke up? Tell me about it. That's for you to go through the whole thing and tell me the thing. That is a very open question. You could say literally anything to answer that question, right?
Yeah.
The way you would do this cross-examination is you already know the answers to these things. So I say, Patrick, you woke up at about 8:30 yesterday, yes?
That's what the data says on my phone.
And then you went.
That's when the alarm went off.
And you got dressed next, correct? Yes. These are yes or no questions.
I mean, I might have had a cup of coffee, but I got dressed.
It's a yes or no question with a brief amount of explanation, because you're going to follow up with the next question.
Exactly.
Keeping the questions very short, concise, and closed, and walking through it step by step.
But you're not opening the door for a long explanation. It's a short explanation
that you have to show. You have to control, and then you can stop. You can say, you have to get the yes or no. And then if they extrapolate, fine. And then you can ask the judge to limit their explanation, because they're not allowed to just go on and on and on to explain their answer. And you create a rhythm, and you ask very obvious questions that are yes or no, and you create a rhythm so that the witness just starts going yes, 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 yes. And then maybe they'll stop before the next question, but they've got to think of what they need to explain before you've gone on to the next question, because once you've gone on to the next question, it's too late. And that's how you do a very concise, thorough cross-examination.
Yeah, and I think there was something else very interesting. When this whole moment we just watched with Alex Murdoch, he was talking about the pills. The prosecution was implying, based on their questioning, that maybe he killed Paul and Maggie because in May he received a text from Paul about pills. Mom found some pills in your bag. We need to talk. And it's like, okay, is that the new motive? What's going on here? So what happened with all of that propensity evidence, that stuff that you said wasn't to show character, but the motive was to distract. And now they're on this very clear line where he's implying that Paul was a little detective and that Maggie and Paul were on him like a hawk, is the way Creighton Waters framed it. And which clearly implies that you killed them because they knew about your drug use.
Do you think that the defense is going to ask for a mistrial based on some of the questions that Creighton Waters asked and the way he framed some of those questions? What's your take on that, whether they would want to at this point? I don't even know that they would want a mistrial at this point.
I think there's a really good chance for a hung jury in this case. I think that the state
To bring, I mean, it's probably costed millions of dollars to bring this case with all these expert witnesses they've had to bring from out of state.
and they're not going to have any more evidence in 2 years.
Right. Well,
than they have today.
The other important thing for requesting a mistrial, you make the motion for mistrial, you're preserving it for appeal. So the judge is going to have to rule on that motion for mistrial, and then that's going to be a subject of an appeal. How likely do you think it is that there's some real appealable issues with the way that the state has brought this case?
I think there are some definite appealable issues. I mean, the biggest appealable issue is the state. It feels like after this cross, they concocted this motive argument that he was using it to distract, which always sounded crazy to me, because if I wanted to distract, go kill my wife and kids seems like the greatest miscalculation to say, well, nobody's going to be looking at me now.
Because I just committed.
I mean, it's like, it just made no sense, that whole argument. I've heard people say that it was a great theory, and it's like, man, it makes no sense to me, just as a human being, as a dad and a husband, especially considering that all of the evidence that of the state's own witnesses showed that this family was a close-knit family, and they seemed to really care a lot about each other.
They were pulling all the strings they had to protect their son, when in fact Paul had done some pretty bad things, and had some real problems that his dad would go out of his way to try to hide from people, or to try to remedy for him and keep him out of trouble. They were constantly having to pull strings to keep him out of trouble.
It's like you're using all of this character evidence to show propensity, is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which was supposed to be in there for motive. And so I think that's a huge appealable issue. I think that South Carolina, their appellate courts are going to be addressing an issue potentially. If he's convicted, they're going to have to deal with this issue of, are we going to allow the state to concoct a motive and then be able to use that evidence to basically argue and imply to the jury that there is a predisposition of this person to do all of these bad things, therefore they must have killed their wife and son? There's a reason we have those kinds of limitations on evidence, and it's to protect our rights. If the state can pick up every bad thing you ever did in your life and then say, well, he had a motive, he had all these bad things in his past, then we're all in trouble. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, just so people understand that character evidence is very limited in trials, because you're not supposed to show that you're using it to show they have a propensity to do bad things, right? But the exception that the state's used from the beginning is that it's not for that, it's to show motive. But the problem is that it's a sham motive.
It is. And I think they made that clear in this cross.
Yeah, I think the sham motive is become very clear since the cross-examination.
Thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like button. And don't forget to check out all of our other Alex Murdoch videos. There's plenty of them, and we're going to continue to follow this trial to completion.